This is not a movie. This is real history, the story of one man who changed the world through fear, faith, and fire. You'll see how wealth became ideology, how belief turned into destruction, and how the most wanted man on earth finally fell. Every event here is fact. Watch till the end, learn, think, and never forget. Osama bin Laden was born in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia in 1957, the 17th child of Mohammed bin Awad bin Laden, a wealthy construction magnate originally from Yemen. His father's company was one of the largest in the Middle East, building royal palaces, mosques, and major infrastructure projects for the Saudi government. The bin Laden family lived in luxury, surrounded by servants, private drivers, and the privileges of being close to the royal family. Osama grew up in Jeddah, where he attended elite private schools. Unlike many of his brothers, who later studied in the West, he stayed in Saudi Arabia. He was described as quiet, serious, and deeply religious even as a teenager. While others enjoyed sports and television, he spent long hours reading the Quran and memorizing verses. Teachers and classmates noticed his calm manner and his preference for solitude. In his early years, he showed no signs of violence or rebellion. Instead, he was shaped by discipline and faith. The conservative environment of Saudi Arabia in the 1960s and 1970s influenced him strongly, especially the rise of Islamic revival movements after events like the 1967 Arab-Israeli War. He became fascinated with religious identity, purity, and the idea that the Muslim world had lost its strength. At the age of 10, Osama lost his father in a helicopter crash, an event that deeply affected him. The vast family fortune was divided among dozens of children, but financial security remained absolute. The young Osama continued his studies at King Abdul Aziz University in Jeddah, where he took courses in economics and management. More importantly, he met several influential Islamic scholars, including Abdullah Azam, who promoted the idea of global jihad to defend the Muslim world. During his university years, Osama's worldview hardened. He began to see material wealth as empty without moral and spiritual purpose. He was particularly drawn to the belief that Muslims had a duty to resist oppression and corruption wherever they appeared. Though he still lived comfortably, driving luxury cars and managing family business interests, he grew increasingly critical of Western influence in Saudi society. By his early 20s, Osama bin Laden had become a devoted follower of strict Islamic teachings. He prayed regularly, avoided extravagance, and gave large sums to charity. He was not yet a revolutionary, but his foundation had been laid: a disciplined mind, a strong sense of religious duty, and the conviction that his life should serve something greater than wealth. The young man who could have lived a peaceful and privileged life was already turning toward a different path, one guided not by comfort, but by conviction.
In 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan to support a collapsing communist government in Kabul. Across the Muslim world, the invasion was seen as a direct attack on Islamic land. For Osama bin Laden, then in his early 20s, this event became a turning point. He believed it was his duty to help defend fellow Muslims from foreign occupation. What began as a political crisis for one nation became for him a spiritual and moral calling. Osama traveled to Pakistan soon after the invasion, joining the growing network of Arab volunteers who came to support Afghan resistance fighters known as the Mujahideen. He was not a trained soldier, nor did he have combat experience, but he brought something equally powerful: money, influence, and organizational skills. His family wealth gave him the means to fund weapons, equipment, and construction. With his resources, he built tunnels, roads, and supply routes in the border regions between Pakistan and Afghanistan. In the early years, Osama worked closely with Abdullah Azam, a Palestinian scholar and preacher who encouraged Muslims worldwide to join the Afghan jihad. Together, they established guest houses in Peshawar, where foreign fighters arriving from different countries could stay before being sent to training camps. Osama's generosity and discipline quickly earned him respect among other volunteers. He was seen not only as a sponsor, but as a brother who lived simply, shared danger, and prayed with the fighters. Although he lacked military expertise, Osama began learning the basics of guerrilla warfare. He observed battles, studied tactics, and accompanied small units on operations in the mountains. He saw the harsh realities of war: injuries, death, and the suffering of civilians, but interpreted them through a religious lens. For him, sacrifice became proof of faith, and every victory a sign of divine support. The combination of wealth, belief, and personal courage turned him from a donor into a leader.
Throughout the 1980s, Osama built a growing network of contacts among fighters from Egypt, Yemen, Jordan, and other Arab countries. With Azam's guidance, he founded training bases and supply systems that supported thousands of volunteers. One of the most important was the Maktab al-Khidmat, or Services Bureau, which collected funds and distributed resources for the Afghan war. It would later evolve into the foundation of al-Qaeda. As the conflict dragged on, Osama's reputation expanded. He was admired for his commitment and modesty, for rejecting luxury, and for sharing the hardships of war. Reports describe him personally financing the construction of tunnels in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan, sometimes digging alongside the fighters. American and Pakistani intelligence also provided support to the Mujahideen during this period, not directly to Osama, but to the wider resistance movement, which benefited from vast flows of weapons and money. When Soviet troops began to withdraw in 1988, Osama felt vindicated. The Mujahideen, with limited means, had forced a superpower to retreat. For him, this was more than a military victory. It was a revelation. He concluded that faith and determination could defeat even the most advanced armies. This belief would define his later actions and worldview. By the end of the decade, Osama bin Laden had transformed from a wealthy Saudi businessman into a battle-hardened ideologue. The Afghan war gave him structure, purpose, and a vision of global struggle. Surrounded by loyal followers and inspired by the sense of divine mission, he saw himself not merely as a supporter of jihad, but as its protector. The mountains of Afghanistan had forged his conviction that Islam was under siege, and that he was chosen to defend it, no matter the cost. After the withdrawal of Soviet forces from Afghanistan in 1989, the war that had united thousands of fighters came to an end. Many of the Mujahideen returned to their home countries, but Osama bin Laden did not. For him, the victory was not the end of a campaign, but the beginning of a global mission. He believed that if a group of believers could defeat a superpower like the Soviet Union,
then another superpower could also be defeated. In his eyes, the next enemy was no longer the communists, it was the United States, whose troops were now stationed in Saudi Arabia after the Gulf War. In 1988, while the war in Afghanistan was still ongoing, Osama created an organization that he called Al-Qaeda, meaning the base in Arabic. It was designed as a central hub for coordinating Islamic fighters worldwide. The group's original goal was to continue jihad beyond Afghanistan, linking volunteers from different countries under a single command structure. Al-Qaeda's first recruits were veterans of the Afghan War, experienced fighters, many of them trained in guerrilla tactics and radicalized by years of conflict. During the early 1990s, Osama moved between Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Sudan. He was welcomed in Sudan by the Islamist government of Hassan al-Turabi, who provided sanctuary to radical groups. In Sudan, Osama invested his wealth in construction, agriculture, and transport businesses that also served as fronts for al-Qaeda's operations. He built training camps, safe houses, and logistical networks. Thousands of new recruits came from North Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia, drawn by his message of resistance against the West. Al-Qaeda's structure was both simple and secretive. It consisted of small, autonomous cells connected by trusted couriers and personal loyalty to Osama. There were no official uniforms, ranks, or territories. The group functioned as a network rather than a state, able to survive even if parts of it were destroyed. Bin Laden focused on ideological indoctrination, emphasizing that jihad was a duty for all Muslims, not limited by geography. He wrote letters, recorded audio messages, and financed propaganda to inspire followers worldwide.
Throughout the early 1990s, Al-Qaeda began testing its reach through smaller attacks. In 1992, operatives linked to the group bombed a hotel in Aden, Yemen, where American soldiers were expected to stay before heading to Somalia. The attack failed to hit its intended target, but marked the organization's first known operation. A year later, in 1993, militants connected to Al-Qaeda carried out the first bombing of the World Trade Center in New York City, killing 6 people and injuring more than 1,000. Although Osama's direct involvement was unclear, the network around him provided ideological and logistical support. The turning point came in 1996 when bin Laden was expelled from Sudan under international pressure. He returned to Afghanistan, where the Taliban had taken control of most of the country. Under their protection, he rebuilt his network, expanded training facilities, and issued public statements declaring war on the United States. In 1998, he and his deputy, Ayman al-Zawahiri, announced the creation of the World Islamic Front for Jihad against Jews and Crusaders, formally calling for attacks on American civilians and military targets. That same year, Al-Qaeda carried out its deadliest attacks to date, simultaneous truck bombings at the U.S. embassies in Nairobi, Kenya, and Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. The explosions killed 224 people and injured thousands, most of them African civilians. The operation demonstrated the group's global coordination and ability to strike far beyond the Middle East. In October 2000, Al-Qaeda attacked again, this time targeting the U.S. Navy destroyer USS Cole in the Yemeni port of Aden. A small boat packed with explosives rammed the ship, killing 17 American sailors. The attack was planned with precision,
and marked a clear escalation in tactics and ambition. By the end of the decade, Osama bin Laden had transformed al-Qaeda from a small support network into a transnational terrorist organization with cells on several continents. Its message resonated among disillusioned and angry young men who felt betrayed by their governments and humiliated by Western power. Osama's calm speeches, filmed in remote mountain camps, presented him not as a soldier, but as a teacher of faith and resistance. His ability to blend ideology, organization, and symbolism made al-Qaeda a new kind of threat, one that did not need armies or borders to fight a global war.
On the morning of September 11, 2001, the United States woke to a clear blue sky. It was a Tuesday like any other. People prepared for work, children left for school, and airplanes began their routine flights across the country. No one imagined that within hours, the world would witness one of the darkest days in modern history. For years, Osama bin Laden and his inner circle within al-Qaeda had been planning an attack unlike any before. The operation had been developed in secrecy in Afghanistan, where bin Laden lived under the protection of the Taliban. The mastermind behind the tactical plan was Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, a Kuwaiti-born militant who proposed the idea of using hijacked commercial airplanes as weapons. Osama approved the plan and financed the mission through al-Qaeda's network, selecting men who were loyal, educated, and willing to die. 19 hijackers were chosen, many of them from Saudi Arabia. They trained in camps in Afghanistan and later traveled to Western countries for flight lessons. Several of them lived quietly in the United States for months, blending into ordinary life. They learned how to fly Boeing aircraft, studied airport procedures, and communicated with their handlers through coded messages. The plan was to hijack multiple airplanes simultaneously, turning them into missiles aimed at symbols of American power. At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11, a Boeing 767 traveling from Boston to Los Angeles, crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City. The impact tore through the building between the 93rd and 99th floors. The explosion created a massive fireball, sending debris and smoke into the morning sky. News networks broke into regular programming, assuming it was a tragic accident. But 17 minutes later, at 9:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 struck the South Tower. The second explosion confirmed what the world feared. This was not an accident, but a coordinated attack.
At 9:37 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon, the headquarters of the United States Department of Defense in Arlington, Virginia. The western side of the building collapsed, killing military and civilian personnel inside. Minutes later, the entire airspace over the United States was closed. Commercial flights were grounded for the first time in history. Chaos and disbelief spread across the nation. Meanwhile, the passengers of United Airlines Flight 93, traveling from Newark to San Francisco, learned through phone calls what was happening to other planes. Realizing their fate, they attempted to overpower the hijackers. At 10:03 a.m., the plane crashed into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, killing everyone on board, but preventing the attackers from reaching their intended target, believed to be either the White House or the U.S. Capitol. At 9:59 a.m., less than an hour after being hit, the South Tower of the World Trade Center collapsed in a roar of dust and steel. At 10:28 a.m., the North Tower followed. The skyline of New York disappeared under clouds of smoke and ash. Thousands of firefighters, police officers, and paramedics rushed to the scene, many losing their lives as they tried to save others. Within just 102 minutes, the two tallest buildings in America were gone. In total, 2,977 people were killed, including passengers, rescue workers, and civilians from more than 90 countries. It was the deadliest terrorist attack in human history. The shock reverberated around the globe. Stock markets closed, flights were canceled, and millions watched the events unfold live on television. The United States, long considered untouchable on its own soil, had been struck at its heart. In Afghanistan, Osama bin Laden and his followers watched the news in silence. The attacks had achieved what he had long promised: to bring fear, confusion, and pain to the West. Within hours, U.S. intelligence agencies identified al-Qaeda as the prime suspect. The next day, President George W. Bush declared that America was at war against terrorism. The Taliban refused to hand over bin Laden, setting the stage for the invasion of Afghanistan. The events of September 11th changed the course of history. Security systems, foreign policies, and global alliances were transformed overnight. For millions, the images of falling towers, burning buildings, and desperate faces remained imprinted forever. The day ended with smoke still rising over New York and Washington, and a single name dominating every headline: Osama bin Laden.
In the aftermath of the September 11 attacks, Osama bin Laden became the most wanted man on earth. The United States and its allies launched Operation Enduring Freedom in October 2001, targeting al-Qaeda's bases and the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. Within weeks, the Taliban government collapsed and al-Qaeda's training camps were destroyed. Yet Osama himself disappeared. American and British forces, along with Afghan militias, searched the caves and mountains of eastern Afghanistan, convinced he was hiding in the rugged Tora Bora region near the Pakistani border. In December 2001, U.S. intelligence received credible information that bin Laden was trapped in the Tora Bora Mountains. American and Afghan forces bombed the area heavily and searched cave by cave. Despite the assault, he managed to escape, likely crossing the border into Pakistan through secret mountain trails. The failure to capture him at Tora Bora would become one of the most debated moments in the War on Terror. From that point forward, Osama bin Laden vanished completely from sight, earning the title the Ghost of the Mountains. For years, no one knew his exact location. The CIA and Pakistani Intelligence Service, ISI, conducted joint operations, intercepting phone calls, tracking couriers, and collecting satellite images. But bin Laden had learned from previous mistakes. He abandoned all forms of electronic communication. No phones, no internet, no radio. All messages were hand-delivered by trusted couriers who had served him for years. He also avoided cities and moved between safe houses in remote areas. His small circle of bodyguards and family members remained fiercely loyal, believing he was a spiritual leader chosen by God. While Osama hid, al-Qaeda fragmented but did not disappear. The organization evolved into a decentralized network with affiliates in Yemen, Iraq, North Africa, and Southeast Asia.
These groups carried out new attacks, such as the 2004 Madrid train bombings and the 2005 London transit bombings, both inspired by al-Qaeda's ideology. Even though Osama no longer appeared in public, his influence persisted through pre-recorded audio and video messages released to media outlets. Each message was analyzed by intelligence agencies, yet none revealed his location. Between 2002 and 2010, hundreds of people were captured or killed in the search for him, but every lead eventually went cold. U.S. military operations expanded into Pakistan's tribal areas, where al-Qaeda remnants were believed to hide. Drones flew constant surveillance missions, striking suspected compounds. Still, Osama remained invisible. He lived a life of extreme caution, relying on a few couriers to maintain contact with al-Qaeda's leadership. His movements were rare, his communications slow, but his legend grew. By 2007, analysts began to focus on a key courier known as Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti. U.S. intelligence agencies suspected he was one of the few people who still had direct access to bin Laden. Tracking him became the central strategy of the manhunt. Over several years, agents followed his phone activity, his travels, and his associates. The breakthrough finally came in August 2010 when al-Kuwaiti made a call that was intercepted by the CIA. The call led to a quiet residential city in northern Pakistan called Abbottabad. There, agents discovered an unusual compound built in 2005. It was 3 stories tall, surrounded by high concrete walls topped with barbed wire. Unlike neighboring houses, it had no telephone lines, no internet connection, and no visible trash collection. The residents burned their garbage inside the property. Children played in the courtyard but never attended school. Observers noted a tall man who walked in circles on the third-floor balcony but never left the house. The CIA began months of surveillance, using drones and local informants to monitor every movement. By late 2010, analysts were convinced that the compound was hiding someone of great importance. Although there was no photographic proof, the building's security and isolation matched bin Laden's known habits. The information reached President Barack Obama in early 2011. The evidence was strong but not absolute. There was only a 60 to 80% chance that the man inside was Osama bin Laden. Still, after nearly a decade of searching, the United States decided to act. For almost 10 years, Osama bin Laden had managed to evade the world's most powerful intelligence networks. He lived without technology, without travel, without any public trace. From the caves of Tora Bora to the quiet streets of Abbottabad, he transformed from a global figure into a shadow. The hunt for him became a symbol of persistence, frustration, and obsession. The man who had once broadcast his messages to millions now lived behind high walls cut off from the world he had set on fire. The night operation unfolded with precision after months of intelligence, planning, and rehearsal. United States analysts had built a detailed model of the Abbottabad compound and briefed senior leaders on the risks and probabilities. The mission was authorized by the President and entrusted to an elite Navy SEAL unit. Under the cover of darkness, 2 stealth-modified helicopters crossed into Pakistani airspace and approached the high-walled property on Kakul Road. One helicopter experienced a hard landing inside the compound after its rotor wash and the narrow courtyard, combined with hot air, reduced lift.
The aircraft sustained damage and was later disabled to prevent technology from falling into foreign hands. Despite the unexpected crash, the assault team adapted instantly, breached gates and doors with explosives, and moved methodically through each floor. Soldiers cleared rooms in a controlled sweep, encountering women, children, and a small number of adult men. In a third-floor room, operators located the man they had sought. Shots were fired, and Osama bin Laden was killed during the engagement. The assault team recovered a large volume of material from the compound: computers, hard drives, USB devices, handwritten notes, and other documents. Photographs were taken to confirm identity on site. The team then departed with the recovered items and the body, flying out of Pakistan under cover of night. The entire ground phase of the operation lasted under an hour and drew immediate global attention. Within hours, U.S. officials confirmed that the operation had been carried out and that a high-value target had been killed. Intelligence agencies worked quickly to analyze the seized material, which provided insight into communications, networks, and plans. DNA testing, facial analysis, and other biometric confirmations were completed to establish identity. The United States stated that the body was buried at sea within 24 hours in accordance with certain legal and religious considerations, a decision made to avoid creating a physical shrine and to expedite disposition. The raid produced immediate diplomatic fallout. Pakistan expressed anger at the unilateral incursion into its territory, and bilateral relations with the United States were strained as questions arose about how such a high-profile individual had lived for years in a compound near a military academy. Debates followed internationally over sovereignty, law, and the rules of engagement in counterterrorism operations. Supporters of the raid argued that the operation achieved a necessary justice and degraded al-Qaeda's command structure. Critics warned about precedent, civilian risk, and the potential for further violence in retaliation.
Strategically, the death of bin Laden removed a symbolic leader and disrupted certain lines of command, but it did not end the ideology or the movement that had spread over decades. Al-Qaeda's central organization was weakened, yet affiliates and new extremist groups continued to emerge in different regions, adapting tactics and exploiting local grievances. Counterterrorism efforts shifted toward dismantling networks, countering propaganda, and addressing conditions that fostered radicalization. Intelligence agencies prioritized the analysis of the seized archives to map relationships, financial flows, and future threats. The operation became a defining moment in the modern fight against transnational terrorism. It showcased advances in intelligence, covert action, and interagency cooperation, while also highlighting persistent legal and ethical dilemmas. The footage, documents, and public statements that followed were examined by historians, policymakers, and legal experts seeking lessons about prevention, statecraft, and the limits of force. Governments refined approaches to surveillance, border security, and international cooperation, but they also faced the ongoing challenge of protecting civil liberties and maintaining accountability in secret operations. The legacy of the raid was therefore complex. It closed one chapter by eliminating a key figure, yet it opened many others concerning memory, justice, and the persistent need to counter violent extremism without sacrificing fundamental rights. This video was created for education and reflection, not for the justification of terror.
Its purpose is to help people understand how belief can turn into blindness and how violence never brings justice. The story of Osama bin Laden is not meant to glorify or excuse anyone. It is a warning of what happens when hatred replaces reason. The world must remember that no political or religious goal ever justifies the killing of innocent people. No one, anywhere, should commit acts of terrorism. The only way forward is through knowledge, understanding, and peace, because learning from the past is the first step to preventing its return.